I am pleased to be joined today by Steven Beschloss. We're going to have a conversation about what's going on all around America. Steven, good to see you.
Good to see you, Steve. We haven't done this for a while. I'm happy we're doing it today. There's a few things to talk about, I suspect.
How do you think about the journey the country went on over the summer? I tend to look at the seasons as a middle-aged guy, through the prism of my political years, right? Labor Day has a very specific meaning. November's the election. You got Christmas time. The kids are back in school in September. Summer and fall are baseball season. But when you look at Trump raises his hand on January 20th, you go from January 20th to Memorial Day, right? From Memorial Day to Labor Day. What happened in the country from Memorial Day to Labor Day this summer?
Yeah, that's interesting. I would say, and I've been thinking about it mostly in the context of why people haven't been more active and being out in the streets more. I mean, we did have the No Kings protests that happened in June. That was a reason for optimism. Something like 5 million people came out across the country. That's a start. Needs to be more than double than that. Surely, if you go by the 3.5% rule, 12 million of the population as a sort of a baseline. But I mean, just to talk about sort of the general mood, my concern has been that the regime has been busy pursuing its hateful agenda without a day off in the daily onslaught all through this period. And Americans have been going about their regular, normal lives, those who can, not actually necessarily engaging, not necessarily recognizing what J.B. Pritzker, Illinois governor, rightly calls a five-alarm fire. A certain number of people who have understood that it's not business as usual. But it's honestly been disappointing to me that there hasn't been, sort of more, more collective fury, more recognition of collective power that Americans have. And, we've seen it in very, specific and small ways. But, I wonder whether, as you're suggesting at one level, it's the normal rhythms of the summer that people are treating, our world as if it's just, a normal time somehow, at least in terms of, the ways that they've chosen to engage or not to engage. My feeling from some of my own subscribers is, people are, they're furious, they're fearful, they're worried, they're outraged, they're all of those things. But I feel like the last months have been almost more like a period, I was going to say digesting, but in some ways, and this is what concerns me, is that it's been a period of adaptation. People sort of using the rhythms of the summertime and wanting to have a little time to, manage their exhaustion, and therefore it becomes a perfect time for, a military occupation in D.C. or, planning a military occupation in Chicago and so forth. I'm glad at least that's coming. If it's coming soon, looks like it's a question of days. I'm happy it's coming, September, when people are back to work. I know that's sort of where you were going with this, but
Yeah. And where are you right now?
just outside of New York.
Okay.
Just
And
in New York.
have you been to DC since any of this started?
Once, yeah. And
What was your impression of that?
Streets emptier than usual, and conversations with friends, very much of like, they're not recognizing their city. Not only, everyday Washingtonians not there, but tourism down, all of that, as if that there aren't and weren't going to be incredible impacts on, people who want to actually come to America or come to the nation's capital. So I find it dispiriting and emblematic of you want to live in an authoritarian country. The life on the streets becomes in some ways very dull.
To what degree do you connect your observation about people in the country and the experiences that they're having? So, this summer out in the United States, you go down the street in any one of a number of places I was at, you are seeing people go about doing the things they always do, right? Sidewalk cafes are filled, people are out, they're doing stuff. Um, ICE is operating in neighborhoods, in pockets of the country in Los Angeles. If you live in Cincinnati, you're not living under a military occupation like in DC.
Right,
Now, if you're a South Carolina guard member or married to one, right, you may be unhappy that your guard member is up there mulching the plant beds in
right.
Washington D.C.
Do
But
pick
but
litter.
but most people haven't experienced this.
Hmm.
What they do experience is a reality show that broadcasts like the Yule log 24/7 over a couple of channels. It's the headwaters of the river. It's Fox News. It's Newsmax. It's CNN. CNN has a minuscule audience, but the
Yeah,
clips go out. And what Trump does is he assembles around his desk in the Oval Office or one of his couple of other sets a very pliant media. He makes pronouncements without challenge,
yeah,
and it flows out. And so you can relate to what's going on around Trump through the prism of, well, this is what he's saying
yeah,
and this is what he's doing. And I take everything he says literally and seriously, and I pay close attention. So
yeah,
I'm very disturbed. But if you don't take everything he says literally and seriously, and you don't pay that much attention, you haven't seen the things that we're exposed to that worry you about so much. So I wonder to the degree that our anxiety is heightened because we're closely attuned to this guy's reality show.
Well, that's no question. I mean, look, yesterday was, the display of collective power of, dozens of victims of Jeffrey Epstein, and who felt the ability to come together and speak and to do so, maybe with a sense of more fearlessness than they would if they were individuals for all the reasons we know, including, some of them have been worried about death threats and, the threat of being killed at the worst and billion-dollar lawsuits at another level. So there's that kind of collective power, which was, for anybody who paid attention to it, I think it was important and meaningful and touching and made clear, like, why in the world, I mean, how is it possible that there is this cover up that's happened? And I mentioned that because who didn't even show what happened yesterday? Fox, News Nation, I at least know those two. They didn't even cover it, right?
Didn't cover the Epstein.
Right. The press conference that happened of all the survivors, as if it's not an issue, right? As if it's nothing to worry about. So, in some ways, I think this is a part of the pattern that at least goes back to the election, where we learned that these kind of information silos, the kind of separated ecosystems of how people, get information, or for that matter, don't get information, get misinformation, had a lot to do with what the results of the election were. I mean, there was that data that showed that something like 14% more likely to vote for Kamala Harris if they paid attention to the political news. They were roughly the same percentage less likely to vote for her, to vote for Trump, if they knew nothing about the political news. So, the degradation of factual reality has been an ongoing effort, a methodical, systematic effort. Trump is a depraved, degraded, sick, deranged person and a pathological liar at a level of insanity beyond which the country has never experienced before. And the consequence of that is that it's degraded people's capacity to know what's true and what's false, what's right and what's wrong. And maybe the worst in some ways, sort of to your point, what's normal and what's crazy. So the repetition, it's an old part of the dictator playbook, to repeat over and over and over lies, over and over and over the messages you want people to hear. And those at least are getting on Fox, which ensures that his audience hears what he wants them to hear. So they're not worried the way that you and I are worried continuously. And can I say one more thing? If you go back, there's a book, and I'm forgetting the name offhand. I believe the author's name is like Milton Meyer, who did interviews with former Nazis, with Germans in like 1954, about nine years after the end of the war, and they were mostly everyday people, right? A baker and a shoemaker and people who did sort of everyday jobs, who had. Maybe they met a Jew in their life. They hadn't met many. Maybe they had heard something about what had happened, but they basically described that all through the war. I mean, of course, they had all the issues around food shortages and all that, but they never felt. They never experienced, the atrocities in any sense. They never really understood what was at issue because it didn't touch their everyday life.
When you look at this moment, for me, I've been angry a fair amount, furious, but I have only been brought to depression once, and it wasn't by MAGA. It was by the Democrats.
Mm.
And the people that depressed me and really dispirited me are the Texas Democrats, the legislators. And made me want to cry. You have a threat that's so great. The aggression, the mid-decade redistricting, which is an aim to distort the results of the election, to steal these seats. It destabilizes the whole of democracy. And these Democrats understood that.
Yeah.
And they left the state to deny a quorum. And they returned in 12 days. And the thing that they fled was real. And what was required was for them to stay there till December 8th.
Yeah.
And they didn't. And they came back, and you got one guy who compared himself to Jesus, James Tallarico, and the turning over of the money changers' tables. That's what he thought he was doing in Chicago. After 12 days, Abbott achieves the result, and they go back and declare themselves, Jesus, in Tallarico's case, heroes and victors. And I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah. And it's clear that they had to stay away long enough so that the Republicans wouldn't get their quorum. And it's, I It's interesting that that's sort of the thing that got to you, because I think
Yeah.
there's been a lot of failure. There's been a lot of failure at every level of recognizing the five-alarm fire, right? Recognizing sort of the urgency of the moment, and the reality that business as usual is not the way to do things. And every time I hear somebody talking about the midterm elections, or looking at a Gavin Newsom and a J.B. Pritzker who have stood up, and the conversation quickly goes to the 2028 presidential
Makes me
election.
want to scream.
Yeah, I mean, what world do they think they're living in right now that we can imagine that kind of business as usual, and as if those dates are not lifetimes from now? So the sense of people sort of slipping into their normal modes. It's almost the same point we were making about summertime, right? That people get into their natural rhythms, and it's really hard to disrupt that. I think that's where Trump, the Texas Republicans, the Republicans in general, they understand they can act shamelessly, they can act illegally, they can continue to with some sort of limits from the judges, that they've been still kind of taking people out of the country without due process. They can do all these things because there's a limit on how much it seems that both the elected officials and the general public is willing to disrupt the way they've been doing things always. And look, I've talked before about, I think with you, about sort of normalcy bias, right? People not wanting to think that it's really a catastrophe, it's really a disaster, that it's really a big.
I don't mean to cut you off. I
Mm,
always read the comments, and I'm seeing Dorian. That's absurd. No one sounds like a Republican here. And like that to me, right, is that if we can't talk about this,
mm,
right, because of the brittleness of we find them in our audiences, but the brittleness of whatever person set that off, that this conversation, we sound like Republicans, you can't have it. They're going to shut you down, shout you down, shut you
mhm.
up, control the contours of the debate. And I can't figure that means the country's gone.
Well,
If
I mean,
that's the takeaway for what we're talking about right now, is that you I Chuck Schumer's the most ineffective
yeah,
political leader of my lifetime,
yeah,
or not.
yeah. But again, I think the thing that I want to say, whether it's sort of that listener or otherwise, you know, I don't think that you or I, that the goal here is to condemn Democrats. The point is that we're asking Democrats, and we're asking Americans who still believe in democracy and care about the country's survival, and who recognize the seriousness of this moment, to actually act in new ways, and act in a level of defiance that has the ability to genuinely and meaningfully push back against this regime. And so, for me anyway, I mean, I've gotten the same thing. I mean, I will say early on, and this was a blue sky thing. At some point after the election, I said it was really a simple point, which was like, it was disappointing that I hadn't heard more from Kamala Harris, that I was sort of surprised by her relative silence. And the level of attack that came against me for daring to question her. Who was I to dare to question her? And, frankly, it got into all kinds of issues. As a white person, how dare I? And as a male, how dare I? And, all of this. And look, I honestly feel like
There's the
there's
Anne
a lot of this
McGreevy.
kind of
Don't
internet.
blame Biden.
What's that?
I just saw one person. Don't blame Biden. I mean,
Yeah,
why
I mean,
not? Why not? He lost. He lost to Donald Trump, 82-year-old man who was unfit, and this is the consequence.
yeah.
But he has no accountability for it.
Look, I think that for me, the fatal flaw, and I'm happy to dig into this. I try not to litigate too much the last 4 years, but the thing I surely can't get over is the fact that he made the fatal decision of putting in the office Merrick Garland as the attorney general. And Merrick Garland, and I'm sure Biden thought this was a good idea, was to have an institutionalist who was going to represent the values and try to resituate the values of the Department of Justice and the judicial system, which sounds fine. But it translated into dragging his feet, promising that he was going to engage the January 6th and to pursue justice at every level as the facts dictated. And he never got there. And that is a fatal flaw that we are going to pay for. The country will pay for forever. Not holding the guy who incited that deadly, violent insurrection accountable, and at least ensuring that he would never be able to hold public office again.
I don't think there's anything more. This is why this matters so much. Is that going back to your earlier point about the allergy of the self-interest that every time a Democratic leader leads, right, and leading in this moment demands standing up to these aggressions against our liberty, but immediately, right, the act, which should be focused on stopping the aggression, becomes, well, let's put this through the prism of how it ranks in 2028, right, or 2026, and whatever the politics are. And what matters in this moment isn't an empty victory, but a restorative victory, which demands that things be set right. So the lesson of what happened with Merrick Garland needs to be appreciated. And there can never be an instant again where the Democratic Party, right, facing off against MAGA, is viewed as the dishonest party in the electoral competition. And that is why Trump won. The most prolific liar in American history was viewed as more honest about Biden's health, the border, and the economy. And because of that, we are on the edge of losing the country. And what is required is a plan that is deeper than we win, they lose. So, for instance, within 30 seconds of a Democratic president being sworn in, I mean, before the speech, right, before the gun salute is over, Kash Patel is fired, right? There are 20 pieces of paper that the president signs before he says his first word to the country, right? It's that the plane that the Qataris have gifted Trump is seized at the Air Force Base and dropped into the Atlantic Ocean. That the documentation, right, of who did what and who and the type of investigation, the gutting of these federal police agencies that have completely lost control. The reforms, the decimation of the public health services, the disasters ahead, it's going to take decades to clean up.
The destruction of higher education as a daily thing.
If it can be cleaned up.
To rebuild a judicial system that's been under constant attack by these people who use it against Americans and against the law. I also want to say that I've been paying attention. I've been paying attention to I've been reading about the Nuremberg trials, and I've been specifically doing that as a hopeful gesture to remember that there was a period where, at least a certain number of the leadership of the Nazi Party were held accountable. Hitler, Goebbels, Himmler, they had already committed suicide, but Goering was one of 11 that had been convicted and were set to be hanged on October 16th. He committed suicide by potassium cyanide tablet the day before. But some were held accountable. Some were executed in the gymnasium where the trial had taken place. And it's weird to say that it's uplifting reading, but it's uplifting reading in some ways, almost like watching Downfall, the film
Yeah.
about the last days of Hitler in the bunker, uplifted me because it at least gave the sense that he understood how profoundly he had failed and what an incredible loser he was, and that everything that he had planned for the 1,000-year Reich had turned to shit. And so, you know, I'm not about vengeance and I'm not about retribution, but I am about justice. And I think that we're in this mess we're in right now because the people who should have been held accountable on January 6th, and I'm talking about levels beyond the foot soldiers, should have been held accountable, and it didn't happen. And I think it's clear that whoever it is that comes forward in these next years, I think that that's got to be part of the program.
I'm going to send you a gift after this. There is, and I've written about this. I collect old Life magazines, and when I'm home in my lair where I do these from, people who watch this have seen a couple of them. I have them set up behind me, but one of my favorite Life magazines, and the great thing about reading the Life magazines is that not only do you know what happens next, but you know what happens next for the next 80 years.
Mm.
And so in 1938, Life magazine comes out in 37, and in 38, Life turns 2, and it is a huge hit.
Mm.
It can't keep them on shelves, and consistent with the media through this hour. On the cover of the second anniversary of Life is a toddler with a birthday cake too, because in that moment, of course, right, what is the news? The news is about the media. The media is always the most important. So
Sure.
in November of 38, Life celebrates Life. But you look inside the magazine, and in that magazine are the first images of the Kristallnacht, that an American audience sees in the photos. And you even see some pictures of Americans in churches praying for the Jews. Next story in the Life magazine is Hitler and Goering are at Goering's niece's christening. And so you see Hitler and Goering and all the children in church,
Yeah.
right? And this would be like Trump and Hegseth, right? Going over somewhere to a christening. And then in 1946, you have an edition. There's a Palestinian on the cover, right? It says Palestine, and it is about the struggle, the fight, the war that rages to this day. But in the middle of that magazine, you get a last look at the Nazis.
Mm.
And you get to see all of those 11 laid out in their boxes after they got
Oh.
hung. And so you can see the center page of that Life magazine is all the dead Nazi leaders.
Mm.
Robert Jackson, who was a Supreme Court justice, is the prosecutor at Nuremberg, and of course, and everyone who's listening with us should read Justice Jackson's opening statement at Nuremberg.
Yeah.
Attorney General was Francis Biddle under FDR, and he becomes a Nuremberg trial judge. And Francis Biddle wrote a book called The Fall of the Supermen about his observations of these people in the trial. And there was a long magazine piece that excerpted it. But if you go and you read The Fall of the Supermen, you will see his observations on all of these people. And then you'll also see a feature that flows through this moment is the human need to find, and it'll happen here, the good MAGA, or in that case, the good Nazi.
Yeah.
And the good Nazi was Albert Speer. And the worst Nazi there was Hermann Goering, and of course they were all terrible Nazis, right? And they were all criminal. But the delusions, right, that we need to tell ourselves, right, about these things, never change.
Yeah.
And it's an extraordinary, revelatory experience to look back in these old magazines as you see the disaster unfold. And Stephen Miller is not different
Yeah.
in the formation of his character than a Reinhard Heydrich or a Adolf Eichmann. Stephen Miller would have been understood by a generation to be what was called in the 60s a little Eichmann. Hannah Arendt's description, the banality of evil. And that's who all these people are. And have no
Yeah.
doubt when you see the guy from the Daily Wire calling for the execution of the mayor of Chicago, that these people would absolutely put a lot of us against the wall if they could.
Yeah, I mean, look, I got perhaps deluded because when Merrick Garland testified in his confirmation hearings, he made a point of talking about Robert Jackson and how inspired he was by Jackson and his sort of commitment to justice. And so I looked at what he had to say and think, okay, this guy is actually going to go ahead and pursue justice here and seek accountability. And we're now at a point of Trump, the House now planning a reinvestigation of January 6th so that they can now kind of spread the lies that Trump wanted to spread from the beginning. So we haven't made progress, but again, I look at that. I mean, I really appreciate what you're saying in terms of the insights that it gives, but it also gives me hope. And it gives me hope because no, it wasn't 1,000-year Reich.
Yeah.
In fact, it was more years than it should have been. And no, the Trump regime is not going to be 1,000-year Reich either, right? I mean, these people are acting in a lawless way as if they will never be held accountable. But I think we have to assume that that the rhythm of justice, the cadence of change is still within our grasp, and this will have its end.
It I do I do believe it will have its end. And there's nothing that I think about more with regard to the end than this. When I look at a Pete Hegseth, a Kristi Noem, a Marco Rubio, who are all our age,
Yeah,
ish,
Bondi.
and right, and Trump. And here's the deal. Trump is going to be dead for 25 years of people pissing on his grave in this country is the most reviled figure.
Yeah,
Right? I mean, how's it going to work out for Carolyn Levitt at 50? What does Kristi Noem think the rest of her life is going to be like?
yeah,
What is it that either we're missing, right, or they're missing?
right. Well, I think we're back to that point about the information silos, right? They're going to have their cult members, who are never going to abandon the narrative. They're never going to abandon their. I mean, I'm sorry to keep bringing up the parallels with the Nazi period, but there were plenty of people a decade later, 2 decades later, who still believed in the Nazi cause. Well, there's still, there was, I met people in Virginia in the when would it have been? I guess in the 1990s, who were, still believing that the South will rise again. I mean, I
It
think
did in a manner or form.
right, right. So these narratives are powerful enough that they continue to bind people to them, and so I suspect, that all the names that we've talked about, assume that their cult members, their community is going to stick with them, come hell or high water. It's why In my view, it wasn't even just a matter of Kamala Harris winning the election in 2024. It was the need for her to win it overwhelmingly, so that the sense of loss, the sense of overwhelming failure would be unavoidable. And I think we're in this same dilemma. The more you can argue, after the death of Trump and after much of this has been renounced and hopefully adjudicated, that there will still be enough Americans who thought that all this was the right way to go, and democracy was dead and dying, and it had abandoned them. And here were people talking about what they wanted, and were willing to define who the scapegoats are, who should be demonized, who should be held accountable, who would, by their accountability, would free them from responsibility. And here we are. I think we're going to be
Let's
dealing with the mess for a long time.
long time. Well, I mean, you can make the argument, that we've been dealing and are still dealing with the Civil War, right? And
Yeah,
that's 160 years. In fact, it's tough to make the argument that we're not dealing with it still,
yeah, yeah.
right? And
Surely the failure of Reconstruction.
right, and the reality is we needed to hang, and by we I mean the United States government, the United States Army needed to hang at least 100 people.
Yeah,
And it needed to militarily occupy the South for another 15 to 20 years.
yeah,
And unfortunately, that's not what happened. We have a terrible record as a country with regard to these types of matters.
yeah.
Let's talk about something that I am somewhat surprised by. And that's Marjorie Taylor Greene
Mm,
and Thomas Massey. And let me just say that this does not take away the fact that, right, she is a field marshal of this nation's whack jobs, who is utterly peerless.
yeah.
One of the great American fruitcakes, the nuttiest member of Congress. I disdain her.
The,
Uh,
the, the
uh,
mayor of Crackpot Village.
yeah, I can't stand her, and
Yeah,
I can't stand Thomas Massey either. And he's the one with the AR-15s and the families and everything else. And so when I say that, then I got to look in the mirror and I got to remind myself, judge not, lest ye be judged, right? And I think about my dad, who's 80, and I think about how my dad has mellowed out,
mm,
right? From when he was my age to 80, right? And you have some wisdom, right? And it's so every time I kind of get, kind of really riled up about this, kind of have a little pause, things have a way of working out and everything else. And sometimes he'll say people will surprise you sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene has surprised me.
mm,
Um and Thomas Massey has surprised me. And what they've surprised me about is an orientation to a fundamental decency,
mm.
right and wrong, right? The one person who understands what the Epstein story is about is Tara Palmieri, and she's covered it for many, many years. And the point that she makes, it's not a story that's about Republicans. It's Republicans on the Epstein list, but there's Democrats on the Epstein list.
Sure.
Right? Some of the most powerful billionaires, famous names in the world, people with billion-dollar foundations and projects to save humanity. What those people share in common I think of one billionaire with a giant foundation who had a high publicized divorce who wants to cure the world of disease, but it was too much of a lift to help out the 14-year-old girls around the Epstein mansion.
Yeah.
Right. They were invisible.
Yeah.
And so what Marjorie Taylor Greene has said here, right, is no. And Thomas Massey, we want to know who walked into that world and inhabited that world, and the Justice Department knows.
Yeah.
And this is being forced from within MAGA by an issue that started out in my view as a conspiracy theory,
Right.
but was not. In the end, though, all of the conspiracy that was aimed at Biden and the Biden Justice Department, in fact, is what the Trump department is doing. And you look at and you consider the audio of the Maxwell interview in the prison where you have all the laughter.
Yeah.
Prosecutors and the defense attorneys. And this is one of the most notorious child sex traffickers. And you see the insiderism,
Yeah.
the laughing.
Yeah.
Hey, we're kind of a small club here in prison, just documenting it all out. And I think this issue is bearing down and is the portal through which a lot of bad stuff is going to happen to Donald Trump and MAGA. However, and this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, there are Democrats who are very famous on that list.
Sure.
And my question for the 1,500 people proverbially that are with us, you all ready to shoot all the Democrats on that list to save your country, proverbially, and to excise them from public life? Because the only way you get the MAGA guys is having zero tolerance
Yeah.
for the Democratic scumbags on that list.
Look, I'm going to say, sort of on behalf of at least some portion of that, 1,500 people, I'm going to say that what I've heard pretty consistently is like, let justice be served, right? Let's pursue it. Let's pursue it wherever it takes us. And I think that the desire to protect Trump is an awful lot more powerful than the desire to protect, Bill Clinton or whoever else is on that list. I think there's a commitment to justice being served. I think it's interesting that there's statements being made from the women survivors yesterday that they're now putting together. I think Lisa Phillips was one of that group who said they're putting together their own list of names. And Marjorie Taylor Greene said she would be ready to read those names on the floor of the House. Where she would have immunity, and where Trump can't sue her for $1 billion, or anybody else can't sue everyone out of existence because they say these names out loud. So she Thomas Massey, their interest may be to try to root out the Democrats that they hate. The question is whether they're willing to take down Donald Trump in the process.
It seems so, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, if you watch her on Fox last night, they have a big problem with that.
Yeah. And look, I confess that I underestimated how powerful this issue would be. That it would actually be one that sort of brings together Democrats and MAGA people, both saying that they want an end to the cover up and they want to know the truth.
One of the issues I wanted to raise that I wanted to raise with you that I've not had a chance really to talk to anyone about is the destruction of the boat off of
Yeah,
Venezuela
I was hoping
by
you.
the US by the so now first off, I have an allergy to conspiracy theory, right? But I also feel like because I'm from New Jersey, I have a good instinct for when I'm being bullshitted,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So for example, on Substack today, I had a candidate who's running for office, federal office, email me a a Substack post that's attributed to Liz Cheney, a message to Democrats, and I said to the candidate, I said that's fake.
mm,
I had someone send me a thing. I had someone send me a thing this morning about a debate between Keanu Reeves and Elon Musk, right? And I was like, that was fake, right? That never,
yeah,
right? That never that never ever happened. And so when you think about all that stuff, um, I have a good nose, I think, for sniffing it out. I haven't gotten embarrassed yet. I know I will. I'm going to forward something that's completely, made up one day. But
yeah,
for the first time in my life, age 54, I just flat out don't believe a word.
yeah,
Marco Rubio has zero credibility, like the same level as Ghislaine Maxwell. Pete Hegseth has zero credibility. Kristi Noem does. Trump has less than zero.
yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
looking at this boat being blown up, and the Venezuelan communication minister, who I don't trust, of course, right? But he says it's an artificial intelligence photograph, and I don't know, right? I'm not an artificial intelligence, videographer expert. I can't tell if it's real or not. The boat doesn't look big enough to make it
right,
from Venezuela to the United States without
right,
without refueling. But on the orders of the president, we just don't simply obliterate boats in the Caribbean
yeah,
without congressional authorization or approval on the declaration that these are now terrorists.
yeah.
How do you see this? Because I don't believe them. And I think that what I witnessed, if I did witness something blowing up, is much closer to a murder
Yeah,
than a military action.
yeah, a lawless assassination. You know,
Yeah.
we have a problem here. They can tell us that they are all drug smugglers who are bringing drugs into the United States, which by the way is not a crime that is dealt with by by murder. But they seem to think that they have the freedom to murder people that might be carrying drugs. But we have no reason to assume anything in terms of who those people are, or sadly, who those people were. There was I've read some things that have at least asked the question: were they simply migrants trying to get to the United States? This is the problem. We cannot trust anything that these people say, and we are now in this place where they act without any concern about uh, God knows congressional approval, but even the most basic laws of international law, or the basic process by which you make a decision where you actually value human life enough to make sure that you're not just murdering people wrongly.
It is an astonishing realization or moment that the government of the United States just has zero credibility.
Yeah.
Can't trust a word that any government official represents
So,
across the top ranks of this administration. Zero credibility.
so let's just talk for a minute about Putin and Kim Jong Un and Xi and China all getting together, exiting out Trump is part of the equation, and surely having a lot of laughs at Trump's expense as they make their own plans without the involvement of Trump's America. How does that make you think?
So again, I've when I see that Donald Trump is the greatest agent of American weakness in the world. And the inaugural address fundamentally repudiated the Atlantic Charter.
Hmm.
And so 9 months after the repudiation of the Atlantic Charter, am I surprised to see Xi and Putin and Kim Jong-un all together? I'm not.
Hmm.
When you look at the most important relationship over the 21st century for the United States against a hedge against China, it's India. And you look at Donald Trump's arrogance and his foolishness, right, and he's aligned the whole world right against the United States. And what's incredible then, again, as I come back to this, is I want to stop this. Right. And so I've spent a lot of my career as a political consultant. We have to win an election.
Yeah.
It is much easier to keep a wannabe autocrat out of office than it is to remove them from office.
Yeah.
And we have to win. And so again, in this story, to me, there's a media component. The same guy, Joe Scarborough, who looked his audience in the eye through the camera and said, direct quote, "Fuck you," to any of you. That's what he said, not me. That's what he said to his audience, who doesn't believe this is the best Biden there is.
Mm.
Right? The top of his intellectual game, so on and so forth. Total gaslighter. As dishonest as Sean Hannity. And then he goes on his audience and he says, after the Alaska summit, Trump has all the cards. And so he's a fool, if that's what he believes. But
Trump, who said that there would
Joe
be
Scarborough telling his audience that Trump went to Alaska and Trump has all the cards. Right? If he believes that, he's a fool. But the sewage, the delusion, the gaslighting, right? The inability of the American people to access the information they need to get a bearing on what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. And again, the boat, and I know something about boats. I'm not an expert, though, in interpreting satellite imagery. So I have an idea of the size of the boat, and I don't know how that boat makes it from Venezuela to American waters, right? Without running out of gas. And I don't know why there's 11 people on a drug smuggling boat.
Right.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And so, once again, right, the accumulation of the lying begets the next lie, and now the lies are crossing a nebulous space into lies over killing human beings.
Yeah.
Lies over abusing human beings in the American concentration camp archipelago that's being built, including in the reopening of Angola prison in Louisiana, where they painted the detainee cell block as Camp 47. And then the White House made them change it because they didn't want to have Trump associated so directly with the concentration camp. And instead, they made it Camp 57 because of the 57th governor of Louisiana, who does want to be associated with the concentration camp.
Right.
Right. I mean, just astonishing. Robert Kennedy is testifying today, and I wanted to ask you about like how you kind of approach these health and science issues. Maybe you have a scientific degree that I'm unaware of. Right. I made it through advanced biology in high school. It was my high watermark. I accept the proposition that vaccines have saved 150 million lives, right, over the last 100 years. So Florida gets rid of its vaccine mandate. It what's going to happen here, right?
Yeah,
What like how do you what happens, and how do you like consider Robert Kennedy? Like, what is he? Is he psychotic? Is he a sociopath? Is he a grifter? Is his mind completely broken from the drug abuse, the heroin abuse over 20 years? And how do you kind of get an orientation on okay, there's no more vaccine mandate in Florida. Does that mean 100,000 people die? What does that mean?
yeah,
Like, do you have any kind of way to access, because I'm very disoriented by it.
yeah. So a couple of thoughts. One is, no, I'm not a scientist. I know I don't play one on TV, and I, I have experience in higher education, and I've been surrounded by a lot of brilliant scientists, and as a professor, and whether it's climate science or otherwise. So I'm a deep believer in the value of expertise and relying on expertise when you're making decisions. We used to live in a world where policies were decided based on research and study, and then making an informed decision based on actual outcomes and expertise. So all that's been tossed away here. And all the terms that you used for Kennedy. I mean, it's a tough time to be a Kennedy. I mean, if there used to be a legacy for the Kennedy family, boy, is this guy poisoned it in some sense forever. I mean, he will always be part of the picture of what it used to mean in terms of noblesse oblige and a commitment to governance and government and trying to make the world a better place to live in. This guy. Um, I mean, I'm not an expert to be able to analyze exactly what his psychological problems are, but what I
Um,
do know is that the stripping away of vaccinations and the commitment to giving children vaccines, that's going to harm not just those who don't get it. It's going to mean that there's going to be a lot of sick kids who are going to end up in public schools. So that's the point about vaccinations. It's not just protecting your child by getting a vaccination. You're actually protecting other children that they're in contact with. So
um,
I think that we're sitting on a line here. We're up on a high wire. It's a balance beam that's really high up, and we're all sort of hoping that we don't fall off. But it's really hard to look at this public health crisis that this guy is putting in, and states like Florida that are responding enthusiastically to it, that are going to put a
well,
lot of people in danger.
will that I asked the question terribly. What I'm trying to get at is,
Yeah.
do you believe, not as you kind of read this and try to figure out what's going on, is the implication that these decisions will kill thousands of Americans, hundreds of thousands of Americans? Is that, if what I'm trying to say is,
Hmm.
one of
So
the things
we're,
that has
we're all going to
changed
live
in
in a
my
herd
one of
immunity.
the things that's changed, here's what I'm trying to ask. One of the things that's changed in my lifetime, besides the weather, is the collapse of cause and effect.
Mhm.
Meaning, if you jump off that roof, eh, since it's 50 stories high, you're not going to make it. I watch these confirmation hearings, and you watch the back and forth like a tennis game, right? Tennis match. You're watching the ball go back and forth. And despite all the evidence, Robert Kennedy says, "No, I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccine." Well, of course he was anti-vaccine, right? But in a world where words have no meaning, up can be down, down can be up. I suppose for the hearings, like Robert Kennedy, he was anti-vaccine, could be pro-vaccine, at least till he got confirmed, when he became anti-vaccine again. So Robert Kennedy's going to do what all of his critics said he was going to do. And all of the people who said,
Who knew
no, he's
that?
not going to do that, were wrong or bullshitting purposely.
Yeah.
And I think it's obvious. So now he's going to do it. Is there some place that you are aware of, right, or source where, like, for real, in the sense of if you jump off the building, you're going to die? If Florida gets rid of any vaccine mandate, here's the consequence.
Yeah.
The world without vaccines, these diseases existed and these people died and they suffered and they had miserable deaths and you had polio wards. And if you get rid of the vaccines, it would stand to reason that some of those things would come back. And so I had a leading virologist on, Dr. Angela Rasmussen, who's part of Save America movement that I'm part of. And she said you're going to see like polio cases.
Yeah.
Right. Not on the periphery, but in the main.
Yeah.
Within a year.
Measles.
And so we'll have a collapsed economy. We'll have people with polio and mumps and rubella and all of these cured diseases. And I suppose someone in the White House will be saying none of it is real. Well, there's thousands of people being died with no one having an ability to orient what is and what isn't. It's an astonishing moment.
So let me give you one historical reference point. Around 1980, smallpox was eradicated in the world, right? I mean, that was a deadly contagious disease. You can go back hundreds of years to millions and millions of people that were contaminated and died from it. And it was a deadly, painful, horrible disease. And there was a commitment to vaccinate people all over the world, country by country by country. As I understand it, the last people was in some village in India that they vaccinated. And they basically, at the end of that, were able to say that smallpox had been eradicated from the world. I mean, it's, we're talking cause and effect. You can look at the success of vaccination to a healthier human population. It doesn't take a lot of genius to look at the simple causation there. So this guy coming in and saying that he knows better than everybody. There's too many sick people. Too many people who have gotten a vaccination have ended up with autism, even though there's never been a scientific correlation here. I think this is the victory of the crackpot who has been given power and is now going to use that power to pursue his deadly ideas that look, people who know more than I do will say that there may be millions of people who are going to suffer because of this.
It's astonishing to comprehend the misery that is about to be let loose. But we passed.
Can I say this? The one thing that I want to say, and I like to leave people with at least some sense of hope and even the possibility of optimism that positive change is possible. And one of the things I think we've been talking about is the need for media literacy, critical thinking, choosing your sources well. Relying on people whose judgments and analysis you trust, relying on facts as much as you can, and devoting your energy to those people in the public sphere who understand the urgency of this moment and are committed to defying this regime and who are acting on it. I am coming back to a J.B. Pritzker. I'm not happy about an invasion, of Chicago by the Trump regime. On the other hand, I think it'll be an important moment for the country if Chicagoans sort of prove themselves unwilling to tolerate it, and leadership that's committed to defying it. So, J.B. Pritzker is one of 23 Democratic governors around the country. I think, I look ahead to, the rise of Democratic states understanding that they have to put in place their own vaccination policies, like Washington and Oregon and California did, sort of in alliance in the last day or two. So, I think, as dark as this period is, I think it's important to look at the individuals and the kind of collective efforts that are happening, that I hope actually motivate people to realize that we're not we're not dead yet.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt, right? I mean, I love the old Ronald Reagan story about the optimist, right? And in the Reagan telling of the story, it was the little boy who wanted a pony for Christmas, and he comes down, and under the Christmas tree, it's just a floor filled with manure. And the kid dives in there and he goes, "I know there's a pony in there somewhere," right? And Reagan said that's an optimist, right? That's what an optimist is. And I am not, right? I would know that there was no pony in the shit waiting for me, right? That being said, as someone, as a, that's interested in history, we look at the most significant leaders for the advancement of human freedom and justice over the last 100 years, whether it's an FDR, whether it's a King, all of these people, an Abraham Lincoln, all of these people wrestled with doubt and crises of faith while they were doing the things that we remember them for. And, we don't talk about that as much, about, Lincoln's tests of faith and Martin Luther King's, and that these were people, and there's a lot to be anxious about. There's an old saying, the days are long, the years are short. And, 1942, these existential years, 1862, they were just the same length as they are today, right? 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week. We watch a movie about this, and you can get tension in a movie, but the movie's over in 3 hours. But we're going to go through 2025 the same way people went through 1941 and 1942, which is at a day at a time.
Yep.
With a lot of anxiety. And as what's been said for a long time, prophesied apocryphally attributed to Upton Sinclair, that when fascism came to America, it'd be wrapped in the flag, carrying the cross. And we are living through that. And we have to recognize the fascism that is rising, and we have to repudiate it, and we have to defeat it, and we have to have an awakening of our values again, or lest we lose them. And that's what the choice ahead in these next elections is going to be. And it is a choice. We get to make it as a people.
And that's not just about you and me. Again, it's about everybody who's on this call, in whatever small ways or larger ways, you can assert your commitment to democracy's survival and America's survival. And every small act cumulatively matters. I do believe that. I think it's real. And, can I just say one Abraham Lincoln note? He signed into law the plan for the final construction of the transcontinental railroad, right? I believe in 1863. So in the middle of the Civil War, in the middle of the horror of what he was doing, to help to save the Union. He was also, visionary enough and committed enough to the future that he could imagine and support the establishment of the transcontinental railroad that could take people from New York to California.
And he also insisted that the Capitol Dome be completed, so that the Congress would have a place to recongregate under. And so that optimism in the times of greatest crises is something that's important. FDR, in conceptualizing the way the world would be after the war was won, before America was in the war, is another great example of the vision. And so we hope that we see a rise of Democratic candidates with wisdom, with vision, with guts, with integrity, who will take the fight to MAGA on behalf of the Constitution. The United States is a idea that deserves defending, and
yes, please.
And we ought to defend it. It's been a great conversation. We've gone over 12 minutes actually, but so great to be able to spend some time with you, Steven. We'll do it again soon.
Likewise, enjoyed it.
And keep the faith, everybody.
Thank you.
Get involved, get engaged, vote these people out, all of them. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.